Now to Saudi Arabia, where international negotiators are wrapping up a conference aimed at tackling the global threat of drought and desertification. The UN's warned that previously fertile areas are rapidly drying out, with around 3/4 of the Earth's land becoming permanently dry in the last 3 decades. Parts of Africa are being hit especially hard.
In the heart of central Kenya, this sight is becoming increasingly common. Camels wandering across the once cattle-dominated landscapes of Laikipia. For herdsmen like 65-year-old Abdullahi Muhammad, these camels are a lifeline. Before the drought, I owned a herd of 30 cattle. But when the drought hit, all but one of the cattle died. Now I'm only left with one. The 2022 drought was one of the worst Kenya has seen. Across the country, thousands of herders lost their cattle as pastures disappeared, leaving families devastated and without their main source of livelihood. It's a problem not only herder Abdullahi Muhammad is facing. Globally, an area almost the size of Russia is degraded, meaning it is drier and produces less. Human activity, like the use of synthetic pesticides and deforestation, is destroying the soil. And the burning of coal, oil and gas for transport and industry is worsening extreme weather events such as droughts, also having an impact. In extreme cases, once fertile soils are fast turning into sandscapes, a process which is known as desertification and which is already impacting 500 million people globally, according to the United Nations. In Saudi Arabia's capital, Riyadh, for the past 2 weeks, 196 countries and the EU have come together at the United Nations Desertification Conference to discuss how to tackle the issue.
Principally, the African group is very clearly articulating that there needs to be a globally binding protocol on drought so that there is stronger support for those countries affected by drought.
In Riyadh, about $12 billion have been pledged by Saudi Arabia and other public and private sources from oil-rich nations to support the most vulnerable drought-hit countries. As part of the convention, more than 50 countries have set targets to stop land degradation. That is far from enough, say experts.
Globally, this is obviously a pressing issue, as in countries where economies and people really rely on agriculture still as their main source of livelihood, principally that is in parts of Asia and on the African continent. Losing fertile soil means losing livelihoods and then being forced into migration.
Desertification hotspots include the Sahel in Africa, parts of Latin America, Europe and Asia, such as the Aral Sea region here in Kazakhstan. In Riyadh, discussions focus on monitoring, restoration and water resilience. Experts stress the importance of tackling the root causes. Herder Abdullahi Muhammad has adapted by switching to camels, providing stability in a changing climate where the availability of healthy soils and fodder is uncertain.
More on this from DW's chief climate reporter, Louise Osborne. Welcome, Louise. So, this desertification conference ending today in Riyadh, besides pledging money, do we expect anything substantial to come out of this?
So what they've actually been talking about over the past couple of weeks is whether they are going to put in place any legal obligations for countries to meet particular targets to reduce desertification, much like they do with the climate conference under the Paris Agreement. And it looks like, honestly, that is going to be unlikely. There is not a lot of political will for there to be legally binding targets for countries to do this, especially when they already have these climate targets, as I said. But we have to look at it at this point. They have seen pledges of money. They also do make these targets under the climate agreement. And the climate agreement is also essential when it comes to reducing desertification, because it is something that is driven quite heavily by global warming. Global warming can increase and intensify drought, for example, which leads to the kind of desertification that we're seeing in different parts of the world now.
And we saw in the report people switching from cattle to camels. As more land is degraded around the world, tell us more about the impact this is having on communities.
I mean, it's really problematic because we've got over half of the population globally that is reliant on agriculture and livestock for their livelihoods and also, you know, to get their primary source of food, etc. We in the West are also reliant on agriculture to make sure that we get the food. So this is a problem that could impact food security in the future and mean that, you know, people are not getting enough to eat. The UN says that up to 40% of land is already fully degraded, and that is a big problem. It is also leading to communities abandoning their homes where they have been because they are unable to, you know, to farm there, and moving to places where that might be more possible, or moving to cities instead and changing their livelihoods altogether. And in some places, this is leading to some intercommunal conflict. We see this in Lake Chad, for example, where around 90% of the lake has disappeared since the 60s as a result of, you know, this lack of water and desertification. And that means that people are fighting over the resources that are still available for their livestock and other issues.
So can governments do more to slow or even prevent desertification?
I mean, it comes down to money to a large degree. And we've seen over the past couple of weeks that the Saudi government and other Arabic organizations have put up $12 billion to try to deal with this issue. But the UN says that it will need more than 2 trillion until the end of the decade to target to restore 1.5 billion hectares of land that they are saying that needs to be restored. There are initiatives like the Great Green Wall in Africa, for example. So this is a project that is taking place across 11 countries, the planting of trees to make a kind of wall between the Sahara and other places. So it's going to take projects like these.
OK, thank you very much for that. Louise Osborne from DW Environment.